I do remember having an instinct to make the stakes high, which is life or death. And for a child, that's can be overwhelming and amazing.
I was about 7 years old. My mom took me to a bookstore and there was Fangoria issue number 2. It has John Frankenheimer's Prophecy, the mutant bear on the cover, and that just caught my eye right away. And I begged my mom to get me this thing. She made the right decision, got it for her 7-year-old to look at these bloody images. And inside was one photo of the tall man's severed finger in the box in the yellow blood, and another one of Michael Baldwin floating against this red background. And I used to just stare at this thing for hours, and I'd bring friends over like I'm showing them a dirty mag or something. Like, check this out, this is so absurd and weird. There's no monsters. It wasn't like anything else being shown in Fangoria and that, but it still was unnerving.
The universal themes of death and dying and the avoidance of these things pretty much works in mythology, and therefore it works in Phantasm. So if you add to that what I think is really the soul of the film, which is the relationship between the brothers and their best friend, then now you've got something that has some legs, clearly.
The Phantasm series has always been so humanistic. And I think that's why people have liked it for so many years, is because they can relate. They can relate to Michael. They can relate to Jody, the older brother, if that's how they grew up. They can relate to. They can relate to the cool friend.
One of the key core components throughout the movies, which dovetails with my own philosophies, is that family matters, loyalty between friends matter, and these are some of the things that can get us through this very difficult life. And of course it's amplified and very dramatic.
For the tall man, he's visiting Mike in these nightmares and stuff. I didn't necessarily personally feel like he's a boogeyman. He wasn't a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees. He's everything. He's everything dark in your life. Misery, despair.
I was always fascinated by the way that our culture treats the death experience and the undertaking and the embalming and all of that stuff. I also remember the first time as a boy that I realized that I might die one day. I remember lying in bed at about 8 years old and thinking, this is all going to come to an end someday. Everyone I know is going to die someday. And that's a harsh reality for a child. And I think I probably was reflecting a little of that and how I was setting up this battle, basically, between a 13-year-old boy and the physical embodiment of death in the tall man.
I've been asked many times, how does my character relate as far as the tall man? We're one and the same, but then again, I feel like when the tall man shapeshifts into the lady in lavender, she becomes her own entity then.
Even visually, the films have changed. I think they're a good reflection of the era. Part 2 was a big budget, reflected the 80s a lot in there. You look at Part 3, it's got a little more comedy in it, definitely has that kind of 90s vibe to it. 4 gets into the 2000s, and I think it's more into the existential stuff. Personally, I really grew up with Phantasm, and yeah, Part 2, it's action heavy. That was what I was going through in my life, and I wanted to see action movies. There, things were more visceral and visual, and then once we get to Part 4, it's got me thinking again, and now I'm aged, I'm older, I'm over 40, I'm getting too heady about this stuff. I love this series, and want to dive into it. It's still just a movie, but there's something so fascinating about it and reflective of your own existence.
I think that how the most recent movie brings things to a close probably is best embodied by the fact that I was losing a close friend of mine who also happened to be starring in the movie in Angus Scrimm. And I know that while we didn't know that Angus was necessarily ill, you got the sense that he might not be doing many more movies. You know, he was in his late 80s. Most actors, they retire in their 70s. And yet Angus was still going on, and I figured early on that this would probably be his last gunfight. So I think that was a profound influence in how he was treated and how we looked at it too. And it's interesting now how we take the first movie where we have the boy who's having very vivid visions and dreams about death, and the last movie is with a man who doesn't know if he has his sanity due to the effects of aging and potentially dementia. And in some respects, it all is a big circle. So, not to get all highfalutin, but you know, obviously there's a lot of gore and action along the way and fun, but I guess it does have some big themes that we've been dealing with all throughout.
And it seemed perfect to, you know, deal with dementia or an Alzheimer's. We've all known somebody, or you know, a loved one or a friend who's had to deal with this in their lives, and you know, there's something about, like, you know, sometimes they say crazy things, and what if that's real? What if that's their conscious mind is somewhere else, but their body's here? You know, you can really dive into that stuff, and it seemed like a perfect place for this world to take place in, and where we could still do time shifting and a little non-linear storytelling, which I kind of loved in the first film, which kind of makes things unnerving and unsettling. And you know, for me, that's kind of what this film was about, and trying to have some of that innocence as well from the first film.
Here I am, I'm an ice cream man, you know, with a 4-barrel shotgun, and things are switching out here everywhere, you know, and I never know where I'm going to wake up or what it's going to be like when I wake up.
The more I read about hard science and the, you know, and the state of physics today, more of the stuff the crazy stuff from the early Phantasm films might actually be possible, of, you know, molecules and atoms being in two places at once. Wow, if that's possible, then the tall man can, and our characters can.
I mean, that's, again, the world of Phantasm. It creates more questions than it gives you answers. And for me, Phantasm, it's the first film, it's the one I would stay up all night talking about with friends, and we would discuss things, and we all had our own opinions. And it's just like death, you know, what happens to us after we die, you know, and the tall man says, "You come to us."